Welcome to the Vanguard Zone. My name is Sam. I'm joined by John Luca. We're
DSA,
talking about
DSA,
Dark States.
DSA.
And of course, we can't talk about Dark States without the set's boogeyman, Diablos jetbacker Lenard. Continuous rearguard circle. If you are in Final Rush, this unit gets plus 5k. And when this unit would attack, it battles all of your opponent's units in a column. Also, auto rearguard circle. When this unit's attack hits, soul charge 1. And if your Vanguard is Bruce, choose up to 1 card from your soul and call it to open rearguard circle.
So this card is not okay. For a variety of reasons. Let's start with what all my fellow Dark State players are happy about, which is that this card is sweet. In Final Rush, it is a 15k attacker, already something you're happy about, but also it hits everything in a column. That's just straight value for 0 effing cost, because despite what some people might say, waiting till Final Rush is not a cost. That's just how you're building, that's just what you're building the deck to do. Now, on top of that, this thing, when it hits, it soul charges, which is good, keeps your soul healthy. You gotta be soul blasting 5 after all. And then, because you're only running this in Bruce, because it is literally a vanilla 10k anywhere else, you get to choose up to 1 card from your soul and call it to open rearguard circle, thus opening the door for multi-attack. Because you have Marjorie in this deck, which when it attacks, puts rearguards into your soul, to soul charge, draw you a card, and get plus 10k. And you have, I think, underrated champion from set 1, but I've always loved this card, Protobulb Dragon, which when you boost or attack, which can be relevant sometimes, but not all the time, you can counterblast 1, put a rearguard into soul, take a card from soul and put it into hand, and with those 3 cards' powers combined, you just have ridiculous attack turns that can be like 7+ attacks, and you can draw like 2 or 3 cards. Actually more, because Protobulb technically draws you a card, plus you're sustaining your soul the whole time, because everything also soul charges, like, in multiple ways. It's taken Bruce, which was already an incredibly strong deck because it had the easiest 5 multi-attack in the meta already, and now it just has more attacks than, like, most Vanguard decks ever get, and they're all generating you value at the same time. Card rules. Card deserves to be a triple air. The problem with this card is, why does it do everything? It gets plus 5k, sure, pretty simple. It hits a whole column. Okay, did we need to staple those to each other? Could it not just be a 10k that hits a whole column? Because being able to 2-for-1 with your attacks is pretty powerful. Also, when it hits, you soul charge 1. Hey, great, sustains the soul. But also you can call stuff to open rearguard circle, which is normally a cost, but not in this deck, and now you just get these insane multi-attack loop turns. Like, it's just, not only is it so good on paper, not only is it so good in practicality, because all the pieces mesh so well together and just generate you an immense value both on board and in hand, but it completely warps the meta. Like, if you just ignore this card in Bruce, you're just going to lose no matter what deck you're playing. So you have to play around it. And now we're just getting into a meta where no one's going to call back rows. And, like, people are actively going to be playing, like, you know, weird rear guards that retire themselves or, like, tuck themselves or, like, bounce stuff because they can't play back rows. Because if you play back rows, you have to guard 2 attacks. Because if you don't, Bruce is going to attack you 5 more times. Like, it's not right. This card is not okay. And it is the single most important card in the set for everyone, but especially
Yeah,
Bruce.
I think the one thing I'll add is be careful about decking out. That's all. Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing, Yeah, the reason I didn't mention that, and I should have, is Bruce players didn't have to worry about that before, but I main Gravity Master. So decking out I'm always acutely aware of, so now I just got to do it in 2 Dark States deck. But yeah, you have to soul charge off of this, and it's important that you have to soul charge whenever it hits, even if you don't call or whatever. You have to soul charge. And then Marjorie is like, you know, like a -2 from deck because it soul charges and things. So yeah, decking out is a big thing now, but that doesn't matter when it's leading to
Bruce
7
always
attack.
had to
Like,
worry
just
about decking out, just not as much as Gravity Master until now. But this card's insane. This is the meta. The other triple rare in Dark States, not quite as powerful as Lenard, is Crimson Expeller. Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, Soul Charge 1. Act in Soul, cost, Counterblast 1, put this card into your drop zone. Soul Charge 1 and choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets power plus 10k until end of turn.
So Crimson Expeller is okay. So I'm going to preface this by saying results have been coming in. This card's a 4 of in Master of Gravity. And I see it, and I get it, and I think that's definitely the right call. Here's the problem with this card. I am a DI main. I am a DI fanatic. DI is best. I have played DI in... I dropped out in G, but in the very start of Vanguard and in V, I played DI. DI always gets these cards. DI always gets the attack soul charge cards. And these cards, you're never happy playing, and you always replace them like 2 or 3 sets down the road. So I don't think this card is that good. Especially in Gravmaster, because its active in Soul is actively bad. It puts you further into decking because it replaces itself in the Soul, and you would pretty much probably never be using this effect until you're like at 15 Soul. It costs a Counterblast, and Grabmaster's a pretty Counterblast heavy deck. Like, Selfish Engraver is amazing. It's like such a good countercharger. But you really need those Selfish Engravers to continue using Grabmaster any turn. So you really can't afford to be using Counterblast on this ability, especially because this ability sucks a lot in Grabmaster. Because everyone's perfect guarding your Grabmasters anyway, you're rarely going to get value out of this plus 10k. Now, I will say again, everyone's running this card, and I think it's probably great in Grabmaster, and I think it leads to potential Grabmaster builds where you can drop stuff like Brother's Soul, and you can play more aggressively to the board, and you can just, like, still Turbo Soul, but while, like, calling full fields, because this thing just straight Soul Charges 1 on attacks, and if your opponent wants to expend resources dealing with it, you're probably pretty happy about that, and then you get to play more aggressively in a deck that one-sided board wipes, which is fucking phenomenal. And I will say this as well. This card is generic. It does not reference anything, so it will work across the board in Dark States decks. So I can definitely see in the future, especially if we get Gear Chronicle stuff and your Vanguard attacks are important and you're restanding and recalling and stuff, I can see this becoming a powerful player because the second ability is relevant. But right now, this card is a 10k beater that soul charges in Grabmaster, and it does not have a second ability because neither of the
That's what I was gonna add. I like that it's generic. I feel like the next set 3 we're getting a new Dark States red line. Agreed on, and maybe it's all about, you know, sucking things into Soul to gaining power.
Well, we don't know it sucks things into Soul, but apparently it sacrifices your rear guards to power itself up. So
yeah,
it's probably
having this card in Soul probably works out too, and because it's Dark States, it probably will Soul Charge even a little bit. So I think this card is good. Maybe not for Baromagnes as much. Definitely not a Bruce, but generically good, which is what you want to see.
I mean, all signs point to it being good in Baromagnes. Again, I think because Baromagnes needed something in the set, and I think what it got is efficient early pressure. You can call 2 of these on turn 2 and be phenomenally happy about that. And now you've put a bunch of pressure on your opponent.
Legio Wildmaster Darius. Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, Counterblast 1, Soul Charge 1, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of that battle. If you have 3 or more other rearguards, it gets plus 10k instead of 5k.
Right off the gate, This card is obviously irrelevant in Bruce because it isn't really already a Bruce card to begin with, and also Lenard exists, so like this card doesn't even slightly make the cut. In Grandmaster, this card is interesting. Having 15Ks is not bad, especially 15 things that like attack well coming out of Soul, and this kind of does that. It also Soul Charges, always a plus. The issue is a Counterblast, and you need to be doing a lot with your Counterblast to make it as a Counterblast card in Grandmaster. Plus the fact that it doesn't get turned on for its plus 10k instead of plus 5k unless you have 3 or more other rear guards, means that, you know, calling it out of Soul isn't really that efficient in Grandmaster because you're only going to have one other rear guard. So this is a card for the future, just like 100%.
Future.
Yeah, it's absolutely irrelevant in the current things. So we'll have to see when it comes. People are low on this card. I think you're pretty low on it in general, Sam. I'm pretty high on it. I like it a lot. It's a 20k attacker that Soul Charges, and Counterblast is, like, not bad. You know, in general, Counterblast wants something pretty good.
I feel like it's a card that doesn't make sense right now, but I kind of felt the same way about Festival Collection, where, you know, cards like Blaze Maiden Mirren didn't make sense at the time, because it's like, well, we don't really need this, but now with Edgar in set 2, and it's like, okay, this is a card that can work in Overdress better. This card feels like, you know, especially if we think we're getting a Pale Moon deck, this could work in the Pale Moon deck. I don't know. It feels just like generically good. A card that probably won't see a lot of play in both builds. It kind of feels to me kind of like a budget card. It won't cost a lot. Diablos Madonna Mabel. Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit boosts to Vanguard, if you are in Final Rush, cost Counterblast 1. Choose one of your Vanguards, and it gets triple drive until end of turn.
Another example of why Lenard is not okay. This card is insane. This card is just free triple drive for no cost. Besides, I guess it being a 7k booster, whatever. And it's going to see 0 play in set 2. Because you can't afford to be triple driving with the decking you're doing with the Lenard loops. Now, here's the thing. To be fair, the whole 0 play in set 2 only really matters if you care about, you know, playing the meta and, like, playing the most efficient deck. If you're just a Bruce fan and you are just excited to play Bruce in any capacity, this card is sweet and you should pick it up. Because, like, triple drive on your Bruce, it's super cool. People mostly ignored Bruce in set 1 Bruce because your 5 attacks were more scary. This sort of makes your Bruce even more terrifying. Plus, you know, we saw some inklings of some new archetype stuff in Bruce in Festival Collection with Jared, and we have some of that in set 2 as well. So if you just divorce yourself from Lenard, there's a more interesting, like, Diabolos, you know, theme deck, maybe more of a grindier Bruce that you could be putting together. And this card would be a big part
I could definitely see that. You know, Lenard is the meta, and if you don't care about that, no one's ever gonna say no to triple drive, right? I mean, Bastion gets triple drive, Hex Orb has triple drive in set 1. It's triple driving. I mean, you know, like,
so does Seraph Snow.
Like, Strides have triple drive, and those are really good. I think this card's really good. It's just overshadowed by Lenard.
Speaking of cards that get overshadowed by stuff.
Oh, are you talking about Cleave Muddler, which says on Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks, if your Vanguard is Master of Gravity Baromagnes, discard a card from your hand. This unit gets plus 5k until the end of that battle, and if your soul has 10 or more cards, countercharge 1.
This card is worse than a common. This is a double R card with an SP variant that is worse than a common. Selfish Engraver, to be fair, is kind of insane for a common. Like, that card should be a rare. Selfish Engraver is an amazing countercharger in Baromagnes. And for some reason, this card only works in Baromagnes, which just seems really dumb to me, because this card is awful in Baromagnes. Yes, Baromagnes wants attackers, but it doesn't want 15k attackers out of Soul this bad. It has Deep Sonicer. That thing attacks for 18k without making you discard a card. I mean, honestly, the only thing that needs to be said about this card is you need to discard a card in a deck where you have to get to 15 soul, and getting to 15 soul costs a lot of resources. So by the time you get to 10, 15 soul, you don't really want to be throwing away the few cards you have left to guard with to a worse version of a common that gets plus 5k. Like, that's what this has over Selfish Engraver, and that is not enough to even slightly make the cut.
We're going to move on to a selection of rares and commons that we think are worth at least looking into. Starting with Time Jarate Dragon. Auto, when this unit is placed on rearguard circle, put a card from hand into soul and draw a card.
Yeah, this card is seeing some play already. It's not fantastic, it's not splashy or anything, but it's worth a couple slots in decks if you're feeling it, because it is a relatively powerful effect. It's Soul Charge 1 with upside. Soul Charge 1 is already a pretty powerful effect, specifically in Baromagnes. And I should preface this is specifically a Baromagnes card. You could run it in Bruce, but you kind of don't want to. I get there's like an edge case where you could be like, oh, I can set up my Lenards and my Proto Bolt Dragons and stuff like that, but you can kind of already do that as well, and you don't have to waste a slot on something that does literally nothing else. At least in Baromagnes, the Soul Charge is way more important. You can turn like a Brother's Soul that you don't need to get to 15 soul into a relevant card with this. It's just there's a lot of good work you can be doing with Time Jarate Dragon. It's never going to be like the game winner. It's never going to be a 4 of, but it's a card to definitely look into, and it's just it does a good work in the Baromagnes deck.
Supernatural Extraction. Play this with Counterblast 1 and discard a card from your hand. Soul Charge 3. Then if your soul is 10 or more cards, choose a card from your soul and you may put it into your hand.
I was high on this card to start. Sam was high on this card to start. It reads incredibly powerful. The amount it's being run is inconsistent at the moment, and I do see why. This card has a lot of costs. Counterblast is a huge cost in the deck. Discarding a card is not irrelevant. And even though you essentially just get to swap a bad card for a better card coming out of Soul, it's a grade 3 order. Orders can just be less than nothing, and this one can only ever be played on grade 3 as opposed to something like Brother's Soul, which can get the ball rolling starting turn 1. The card has phenomenal art, and it is powerful. I just think it gets outclassed once you start trying to actually efficiently deck build. If you just want to jam some games with Baromagnes, and you love Baromagnes, and you get this card in its, unfortunately it doesn't have any other versions, but if you just get this card because the art's amazing, it's going to do work for you. I would not run more than 2, and I would never run 4 of this card, because the cost of it being an order, and a grade 3 order no less, is super real. But seeing one of these on turn 3, honestly pretty powerful, and you get to look at something pretty in your hand while you do it, so.
Hellblast Full Dive. Counterblast 1. Draw a card. Choose a card from your hand, call to rearguard circle. Then, if you are in Final Rush, all of your front row units get plus 10k until end of turn. This card's seeing a lot of play in Japan. At 4 of.
Really?
At 4 of.
In the Lenard
yes,
decks?
I think this card is great. My complaint about playing Bruce was always like, I wish my creatures were a little bit stronger. And this card accomplishes that for me. I look at a deck like Zorga, right? And on turns when I'm Persona writing and I'm using Grief, Despair, Rejection, like I have like these 33k, like usually more, like 38k to like getting triggers 48ks. And I wish I had that in Bruce. I know it sounds like broken because they get to attack 5 times, and I know like and now it can attack more than five times. The plus 10k kind of gets negated if you're sucking in these front row units with Lenard. But I still think, on a Persona Red turn, having a 35k Lenard by itself, having a 43k Marjorie, a 35k Eden, is really good. Even if it's there for like 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of the 7 attacks.
Not like I always thought this order was
Yeah.
good. It fucking draws you a card on top of everything else for some reason. Yet again, following the theme. Why does this card do one more thing? Though I suppose at a grade 3 Counterblast one, if it just gave you plus 10k in Final Rush, that wouldn't be good. So I guess it does have to do that. This card read well. This card seemed like it'd shore up weaknesses in Bruce. It's just the early lists for Bruce I saw were just like, you know, all in and lettered and didn't have this at all. But if lists are running this card is sweet and amazing, and it makes you terrifying. And it gives your non-Persona Ride Final Rush's turn more oomph, which is really important. Like, yeah, this card's amazing.
Now, the argument is if you keep it at 4 or not, that remains to be seen. But
4 seems a lot.
I do think this sees a place in Bruce. Surveillance Gear Dober, Auto Rearguard Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit boosted. If you are in Final Rush, put this unit into your soul, choose one of your units, and it gets power plus 10k until end of turn.
I mean, this is just the best boy.
Yes.
Just what it is.
Yeah, it's another card that kind of goes with the Lenard combo because it can help you free up a circle. So you could even suck in a Proto Bulb, and then you can pull out another Proto Bulb.
Now, there's just so much you can do. The other thing that's just not okay about Lenard is because it attacks in a column, if you catch your opponent in a point where they can't afford to guard at all, and you can just call a full column out with Lenard, it's insane. But yeah, like exactly as Sam said, this card just does such a good job of freeing up open spaces for Lenard. It also is soul for Brute. The plus 10k is like super relevant. Card's great. And is certainly worth a slot.
Next we have Persistent Icicle Javina. Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, if your soul has 10 or more cards, costs Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. And until end of that battle, when your opponent would call cards from their hand to guard circle, they must call 2 or more at the same time.
This card's not seeing a lot of play, and I definitely get why. Its cost is very real. It would only see play in Grabmaster anyway, and as I have continually said, Counterblast is a very big cost in that deck. Soul Blast is actually nothing to sneeze at either, because getting 15 Soul isn't easy. But this is in the category of cards that I could see being a strong one of in Grabmaster, because since you Soul Charge so much in that deck, and since you also see so much of your deck, I think there's a lot of room for Grabmaster builds that have a bit of a toolbox feel to them, and run like one of cards that they can use later for value. And I think there is a lot of powerful value to be had with this card in setting up turns where you can have the resources to take advantage of having multiple attacks with guard restrict that can really, you know, push you over the edge and have you finish off your opponent.
Steam Artist in the Pier, Continuous, Guard Circle. If your soul has 5 or more cards, this unit gets plus 5k shield.
This card is probably not good, but I value defense, especially in Baromagnes. Your biggest weakness is because you have to get to 15 soul so fast, and also because you have to run 4 Brother's Soul, which, once you're at 15 soul, are completely dead and useless cards. This card is just something I wish we had some better version of. This is a 10k shield interceptor, which could be very strong in Baromagnes. You just don't have the slots for it. But this is definitely something to consider going forward in Baromagnes lists as we get more cards, as things change. I believe Baromagnes definitely wants a rear guard that has some sort of defensive utility, and this is an example of what could be. Or if you just kind of have open slots and you feel like you want a little more oomph on the defensive front in Baromagnes, you should probably look at Tartarus Beat Scrum first, but this is a good second option.
Miracle Splasher, Continuous Rearguard Circle. If your Vanguard is Master Gravity Baromagnes, it gets plus 5k.
A big part about Baromagnes in set 1 is if you whiffed on Sonicers, you sometimes had a hard time actually taking advantage of your multi-attack. This just gives you another option for an 18k beater, which is really good. Again, the slots in Baromagnes are weird right now, and that's literally all this card does. But as I said before, I feel like there is room for Baromagnes moves that are more toolboxy, or even perhaps Baromagnes builds that just, can be more aggressive, can take advantage of just the easiest 18k on a planet. So I think this card is worth having around. I think this card is worth playing around with because it's an incredibly powerful beater that you don't have to try for, and you can multi-attack with it easily.
Cyclone Circular. Auto rearguard circle. When this unit boosts, if your soul has 5 or more cards, cost counterblast 1. Put this unit into soul. Choose 3 of your front row units and they get power plus 5k until end of turn. Good thing to note, the power gained from this unit's boost will be lost.
Yeah, which does mean you can't boost and suck in with Marjorie retaining the boost, which was a question I had, but I knew from Number of Terror that didn't work, and now I have confirmation it didn't work. I like this card a lot. I think people might be sleeping on it. It's probably not good, but in either of the Dark States deck, there is some interesting play to it. You can use it to boost up your initial attacks before you do your Baromagnes attack. And that can just be nice as far as number-wise, and since it's going into Soul, it's essentially Soul Charge. Counterblast is a big cost, but, you know, I think this is an effect that could be worth that Counterblast. I think in the Bruce loops, the Best Boy is obviously better. It gets to boost, then it goes into Soul, and gives one thing plus 10k, which is overall probably going to be more powerful than giving 3 things plus 5k. And it's a little awkward to set up, but just in our current Dark States meta, there is some play to this card. It's a really interesting effect, and I think you can surprise some people with it. So I think it's worth having around and worth testing out in your decks. And again, I think this could be a sleeper in the set. I think this could surprise people.
And that wraps up our Dark States cards. Overall, Bruce is the best deck in the format, and it's because of Lenard.
Yeah. You know, the counterplay for Bruce is Wheel, but the counterplay for Bruce is Warping, and that's why it's the best deck, because if you left it alone, if you didn't counterplay at all, you die. There's no way around it. Unless you know you're on the Magnolia Beatdown plan, and even then they got Brodies, so they can stop you. You just die, you die to it. But I think it's important to note that a lot of the other Bruce stuff is actually super interesting, and there are other Bruce builds out there worth exploring, unless you're just, you know, chasing, you know, tournament victories.
But yeah, I do like the cards in Bruce. Baromagnes, I think they got some fun, and if you wanted to do toolboxy Baromagnes, that's cool, but I don't think anything pushes Baromagnes to the next level. It kind of maintains as a good deck.
Baromagnes, I think, is going to be okay. It got some stuff. The Crimson Expeller is actually pretty powerful, and I think, again, there's still a lot of testing to do, but I think you could get to the point where you are building a Baromagnes deck without Brother's Soul, which I think is a huge boon, because I think that means you can play more to the board, and I think you can now shore up a little bit of your weaknesses there. That all being said, though, nothing flashy, nothing spectacular. Baromagnes, I think, is going to survive off the fact that one-sided board wipes are not okay either. But the Soul Charge is really good. And honestly, if you're just a Baromagnes fan, because there's a lot out of there, because the card is super cool, his art for, like, everything he's in is fucking phenomenal. Because he's just this weird, multicolored vampire man. I think there's a lot of fun to be had. I think there's a lot of interesting new things to try out. And I think Baromagnes is currently the best toolbox deck, because there's a lot of stuff you can do by pulling from your 15-plus card soul. But one of the big losers of the set for sure, because its best card out of the set isn't even really its own card. It's just this sort of weird, generic Dark States card that will get outclassed, because every time, if you ever look at the progression of DI in sets, every time they get one of these cards, it's outclassed in 3 sets.
I think it's a good thing that we're not getting just these triple rares that will just phase at your previous cards, though, because you looked at the end of V and you got these really strong cards, and then they got invalidated the next month by the next set, and that's what kind of killed off V towards the end. Is, okay, I get a few weeks to play, then my deck's bad again, whereas this time, you know, Baromagnes was a really good deck, and it'll still be a really good deck in set 2.
Yeah.
Be sure to leave a comment if you think we missed any cards, and like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube shit, and we'll see you next time.
DSA.